So imagine this. Your next job interview isn't in some stuffy office, but in a completely virtual world. And you're not just answering questions, you're actually doing the job in a super realistic simulation. Now, this might sound like a pitch for the metaverse right now, but it's actually a vision from this incredible academic paper written all the way back in 2001. So today, we're going to dust off this amazing piece of foresight. We'll explore how more than 2 decades ago, some researchers predicted a future for hiring that's really only just starting to come into view. All right, let's get into it. First, we're going to look at the core hiring problem this paper was trying to solve. Then we'll take a step back into the virtual world of 2001. After that, we'll break down what they called the ultimate job audition, weigh the pros and cons of the time, and finally, we'll connect it all back to today. So what's the fundamental problem here? Well, the paper kicks off by tackling a challenge that's basically as old as employment itself. How do you really know if someone is the right fit for a job before you actually hire them? Yeah, think about it, right? A resume, it just shows where you've been. An interview, well, that's kind of a performance. But there's this huge gap between talking about the work and actually doing it, especially when the pressure's on. And the researchers saw this gap as the central weakness in the whole hiring process. And this, right here, is the core idea. The paper argues that the usual hiring methods just aren't high fidelity, meaning they don't look or feel anything like the actual job. The theory is super simple. The closer a test is to the real thing, the better it predicts how you'll perform. And way back in 2001, these researchers believed a new technology was finally ready to bridge that gap. So, what was this groundbreaking solution? You guessed it, virtual reality. Now, it's so easy for us to think of VR as a recent thing, but the dream of creating these other worlds, man, that dream is much, much older. Believe it or not, the story really starts back in the 1960s. The Sensorama was this incredible machine that simulated a motorcycle ride through New York, complete with wind and even smells. A few years later, the very first head-mounted display showed up. But it wasn't until 1989 that Jaron Lanier finally gave it the name we all know, virtual reality. So by 2001, VR had been this dream for decades, just waiting for the tech to catch up. So back then, what did virtual reality even mean to these researchers? Well, they broke it down into 3 key ideas. Navigation, that's just your ability to move around. Interaction, being able to, grab and manipulate virtual objects. And the most important one, immersion, that feeling of really being there. That's the magic ingredient that makes you forget about the real world. Okay, so to make all that magic happen, you basically needed 3 key pieces of the puzzle. First, a really powerful computer. We're talking a specialized graphics workstation. Second, some kind of input device to track your movement. And third, output devices to actually deliver that virtual world to your senses. And the input devices, this stuff was straight out of science fiction. Take the cyberglove. It used fiber optic sensors to track every single movement of your fingers. This meant you could literally reach out and see a virtual version of your own hand grabbing and moving things around. Pretty wild for the time. Now, the key output device for that feeling of immersion was the head-mounted display, or HMD. The paper said they looked like a helmet or a scuba mask. They worked by putting a separate little screen in front of each eye, showing slightly different angles. Your brain then does all the heavy lifting and fuses those 2 images into a really convincing 3D effect. It's the same basic principle that headsets use today. Okay, so we've got the technology, or at least the 2001 version of it. Now for the main event. This is where the paper's vision just completely comes alive, using that early VR tech to create the ultimate job tryout, something that could go way beyond what a resume or an interview could ever tell you. The framework they used is a standard in psychology called KSAOs. It stands for knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. Look, it's just a fancy, structured way to think about what a person actually brings to a job. The paper's truly brilliant idea was to design these VR scenarios to test each of those things in a real context. All right, let's start with knowledge. Imagine you're applying to be a building inspector. The old way to test your knowledge, a multiple choice test with some pictures. But in the VR version, oh man, you put on the headset and you are literally walking through a virtual construction site. Your job is to look around, up at the beams, down at the foundation, and spot code violations as you move through the space. You're not just remembering facts, you're applying what you know in a living, breathing environment. This really shows that shift from hypothetical to practical. Okay, next up, skills. For a hazardous materials cleanup job, a typical interview would ask, so what would you do if? In VR, you're at the accident scene. You see the spill. And with the data glove, you physically perform the cleanup procedure. Are you using the right tools in the right order? An observer can see your actual skills in real time. And for physical abilities, this is where it gets really incredible. How do you test a firefighter? Instead of a grueling physical obstacle course, the paper suggested using a CAVE system, basically a room where the virtual world is projected on the walls all around you. So the applicant walks into this simulated burning building, navigating through smoke and dodging falling debris. You can test their performance in the most dangerous situations imaginable with zero, and I mean zero, physical risk. I mean, it all sounds amazing, right? A more accurate, more engaging, and in some cases, a much safer way to hire people. But the authors, they were also realists. They knew that back in 2001, this whole idea was still a technology with some pretty serious limitations and challenges. And the single biggest hurdle? The price tag. And you gotta remember, this is in 2,000 US dollars. A powerful workstation was about $6,000. The cyberglove? Almost $10,000. A decent headset was another $10,000. And that cave system for the firefighter test? You sitting down for this? Over $300,000. Yeah, not exactly in the budget for your average HR department. So the advantages were obvious, right? Incredible realism, super safe simulations, and perfect standardization, so every applicant got the exact same test. But the disadvantages were just as stark. Beyond the absolutely astronomical cost, the tech had its limits. Graphics were often pretty cartoonish, and any lag between your head movement and the display could cause Sopite syndrome, which is a fancy name for motion sickness, headaches, nausea, not exactly what you want someone feeling during a job interview. So, after seeing the vision and all the roadblocks of 2001, where does that leave us today? How does this idea hold up now, in the era of the metaverse and affordable VR for everyone? Well, there's no other way to say it. This paper was more than 20 years ahead of its time. It was basically a blueprint for a conversation that we're only just now starting to have for real. They saw the potential long before the technology was truly ready for prime time. And you know, their goal was never to have all the answers. The authors finished with this really hopeful statement. They saw their work as a first step, a call to action for other researchers to start exploring this wide-open field. They were planting a flag, just hoping that one day others would come and explore that territory. And today, the world they imagined is coming into focus so fast. A high-end VR headset doesn't cost $10,000 anymore. It costs a few $100. The processing power in your smartphone absolutely dwarfs those old workstations. And with remote and hybrid work just exploding, the idea of conducting these complex, interactive tests with candidates anywhere in the world is no longer science fiction. It's a logistics problem we are actively solving right now. So we'll end with a question for you. If you had the choice, would you take a job interview in VR? Would you rather show your skills in a simulation than just talk about them in a conference room? And more importantly, what would that ultimate job audition look like for your specific career? What tasks, what challenges, and what scenarios would truly prove that you are the right person for the job? It's a future that a few researchers dreamed up way back in 2001, and one we might all be living in very, very soon.